Good evening. You're watching India Global. I'm Gaurie Dwivedi. As always, let's start the show with top stories coming in. First up, big win for India's fight against terrorism. 2611 mastermind Tawur Rana extradited from US 16 years on. The victims of India's most horrendous terrorist attack, 2611, are now one step closer to closure. Mob violence peaks in Pakistan and Bangladesh as protests turn violent. Mobs vandalize KFC and BATA outlets. 72 people have been arrested in Bangladesh, 10 in Pakistan over looting and vandalism. J.D. Vance's Chinese peasant remark causes fresh row. Ignorant and disrespectful is what Beijing says as it slams Vice President J.D. Vance for his comments. The US-China trade war is intensifying. China counters Donald Trump's 104% tariffs with its 84% tariffs on US goods. The trade war between the world's two largest economies is underway. And India gets mega Rafale boost. India seals 63,000 crore rupee deal for 26 Rafale jets. In a fresh spate of growing mob violence in Pakistan and Bangladesh, mobs attacked various outlets of foreign companies such as KFC and BATA in Karachi and Dhaka. Those visuals, viewers, tell you exactly what we are talking, which is mobs protesting against, or at least that's what their argument is, that they are protesting against American and Israeli policies in Gaza. These are protests in favor of Gazans, if you want to believe that. Protesters armed with sticks and stones vandalized businesses. So far, 10 people have been arrested in Pakistan, 72 in Bangladesh in connection with this violence. The attacks comes after a strike in Karachi organized by traders to align with a global call for solidarity with Palestinians and to protest actions against Gaza. Governments have assured that the situation is under control, but viewers, you can see those visuals. And that further action would be taken against those instigating violence. Now, such violence signals a breakdown of law and order in these countries, and that's exactly what I'm going to now be discussing. I want to put out those big questions for this story. To talk more on this, as mob violence peaks in Bangladesh, Pakistan, we ask that is mob violence growing unabated in these countries? Next up, why are Pakistan and Bangladesh actually facing such a law and order crisis? Why is there a complete breakdown of law and order in these countries? Next up, why are they really vandalizing foreign companies? Who stands to benefit from this? Who are they helping with such acts of vandalism? And lastly, our governments are in fact completely incapable of cracking down against mobs, because this can't happen unless the government is incapable of addressing this. And that's exactly what I'm going to ask Faisal Mahmood, who's joining me. He's the Minister of Press, Bangladesh High Commission, joining me on the broadcast. Faisal, now, those visuals at some level really tell the story, that there is complete vandalism on the streets right now, and it looks like this is a solidarity call in support of Gazans. Do you really think so?
Thank you, Gaurie. So, in case you forget, let me remind you one thing. There is a genocide going on in Gaza, right? And hundreds and thousands of Bangladeshi people are protesting on the streets and holding march in support of the Palestinian people. And I'm surprised that
that's not
you
a march,
have
that's vandalism.
this angle.
Faisal, that's not a march, that's vandalism.
As I mentioned, that hundreds and thousands of people are doing that, and you have picked up like less than 100 of people are vandalizing and looting in some northeastern parts of Bangladesh, and that's your angle?
No, I have no angle. I am just showing those visuals. I have no angle. I'm just showing those visuals, and I'm asking you.
I'm surprised that you have completely evaded the angle that hundreds and thousands of people are protesting against a genocide.
Mr. Mahmood, I have one question. Very simple.
Yes.
Do you think that this vandalism is supporting your cause for Gazans?
I'm not talking about vandalism. I'm trying to focusing on other angles, like hundreds and thousands of people have protested. That's the angle. Like hundreds and thousands of people are protesting in solidarity with Gaza.
You
No,
can't
I think you are
cherry-pick, sir.
cherry picking here.
No, I'm
Because,
not cherry picking.
first of
I'm
all,
just
let me-
showing you
let-
the
let-
visuals. You
let-
can see the.
okay,
Let's play them
okay.
full frame.
Because you
Let's
have
play them
cherry-picked
full
the visuals.
frame
You
because
haven't-
I'm sure.
you haven't picked other visuals where hundreds and thousands of people are protesting peacefully. You haven't picked that visuals.
No,
You
this
have
is
picked the
peaceful
visuals that will
vandalism.
support your cause.
This is
But
peaceful
okay, let me
vandalism.
assure you. Let me assure you. I mean, listen. Your TV and the other Indian media as a whole have been saying that Bangladesh has plunged into a complete chaos. So, by that standard, that little visuals is nothing, right? I mean, they're just looting, and 70 people have already been arrested. So you are cherry picking these
Sir, hear
visuals
yourself.
by bypassing the very
Mr.
fact
Mahmood,
that
hear
hundreds and thousands of
yourself,
people are
sir.
protesting.
Mr. Mahmood, hear
I think you
yourself.
should
You
hear
are
yourself.
saying
I think you should hear
this is
yourself.
just vandalism. Just hear yourself.
No, I mean,
People's
again,
livelihoods get
as
impacted.
Per your TV statement, Bangladesh has plunged into a complete chaos, right?
No.
So on your note,
Wait. I said.
I think this is.
No. Wait. I
Yes.
said one of the questions I asked. Questions. I can play those again.
Yes.
The question
Yes.
I asked was: is there a crisis of law and order? Question.
No, there
Is
isn't.
the
There
government
isn't.
not
There-
capable of addressing? Those are
The
questions,
government is
Mr.
completely
Mahmood,
capable of addressing.
that I am
Listen,
asking.
there is an international business investment summit going on in Bangladesh, and investors from more than 30 countries are out there. So we are very concerned about what sort of image that we want to project in front of the world. So we have already arrested 72 people, and this incident is a very isolated one. It happened in a northeastern part of Bangladesh. But what I'm trying to focus, like, instead of showing like hundreds and thousands of people are protesting against a genocide, you cherry pick one incident and say that Bangladesh
It's
has
not a
plunged
single
into further
incident, sir.
chaos.
It's not a single incident. I'm
I
not
mean,
cherry picking. You
I'm
are.
surprised by your.
Let me.
I'm surprised by your.
Let
news
me.
choice,
Let
to
me
be
then
honest.
ask you another question. What kind of a
Yes.
message does this vandalism send to all those investors who are in Bangladesh?
I know this is a very bad message, but the government has already addressed that. They've arrested 72 people within very quick time. And I mean, we have been able to give that message that, okay, if you invest here, your investments are protected, because we are very serious about it. But again, I cannot assure that these little incidents cannot happen when there is a genocide going on in other parts of the world. And this incident doesn't speak of like what in general Bangladeshi people are protesting about. I mean, as I told you, like hundreds and thousands of people are protesting in other parts of Bangladesh. And
As
those
I
are
said,
largely
okay,
peaceful
I've
protests,
taken
right?
your point, and I'm giving you uninterrupted airtime, right? You can at least give me credit for
Yes.
that. Then let me ask you another question, which is my final question on this, which is that what assurances will the Bangladeshi government give to all those investors who are evaluating Bangladesh right now, given that this is happening?
First of all, Bangladesh has transformed into a democracy from an autocratic regime. That's an assurance itself. And now we are being hemmed by a person who has probably the biggest global reputation as a Bangladeshi in the world. So I think that's sort of assurance that we can give, that if you invest here in Bangladesh, it's protected. And this isolated incident doesn't portray the real Bangladesh right now.
The fact that it's actually spreading from Karachi to Bangladesh itself
And
indicates that there is some
this
sort of a
Pakistani
pattern
Karachi
here.
thing with Bangladesh, it clearly speaks of that you have already picked up one particular angle that you want to portray, right?
I'm not picking up
As
any
I
angle,
mentioned.
sir. I'm giving you all the time. You are responding.
I
I'm
know.
giving you
Thank for that.
uninterrupted time.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that.
Final question, 30 seconds.
Okay, yes.
Final question, 30 seconds. What will be your message to the mobs who are vandalizing?
Don't do that again. We'll take stern action.
Okay, let's leave it there. Thanks much for joining me. Well, bottom line, viewers, is that at the end of the day, are these mobs doing the Gazans a favor by vandalizing companies? Who wins after companies are vandalized? Because livelihoods are lost. The nations, whether you talk about Bangladesh or Pakistan, they're going through precarious economic turmoil. And in that case, vandalism leads to livelihoods being lost. And these mobs, unfortunately, have nothing to do with Gaza. It's only about two things. It could be about hatred when it comes to Israel, but more importantly, it's about breakdown when it comes to the law and order machinery, collapse of an administrative machinery and mechanism in place, and law and order. Whatever is the remaining economic cycle that these countries have right now would also be very significantly compromised if these mobs are not checked. All right, shifting focus now to the other important story. In a big legal victory for India in its war against terror, Tawfur Rana, an accused in the 2008 Mumbai terror attacks, is being brought to India in a special plane after he exhausted all his legal options in the US. Sources have told NDTV that the plane would need refueling and is expected to touch down tonight or early tomorrow morning. This comes after the US court rejected Tawur Rana's petition requesting a stay on his extradition to India. Rana had earlier told the US court that he was suffering from health issues and would not survive long. In fact, that's what his allegation and claim was if he were to be in India. He's also alleged that he would be targeted in India for various different reasons. Rana, remember, is an associate of Pakistani-American terrorist David Coleman Headley, one of the key conspirators of the November 26 attacks in Mumbai that took place in 2008, and which is why this story, this development, how important and significant it is in India's fight against terrorism is the big question. All right, on your screens right now, first up, are the victims one step closer to closure? That's the first question I want to ask our panelists on this show. Second up, when will Hafiz Saeed now be brought to justice? Next up, is this a clear message to the anti-India elements in the US? Remember, there is always a Pannu, there is always several other anti-India elements that also need to now be completely clear as to what India could do. And next up, what's next in terms of Tawur Rana from a process point of view, nothing else. India at the end of the day does allow all legal process that is possible for any convict or any accused. Dr. Tara Kartha joins me on the broadcast along with Professor Swaran Singh. Dr. Kartha, let me start by asking you, which is that the first question I'm asking on the show, which is that at some level, this will give a sense of closure to the victims, will it not?
Well, yes, but it really took a long time, didn't it? I mean, considering that this whole process he started in 2001, that's 23 years down the line.
2008.
But nonetheless, at least it's a sign of US cooperation that they have at least delivered this man to you for you to question and get more data on. So that is definitely a sense of, I won't say closure, but well, it's a sense of justice, I guess, to your question. But, in the end, it's about whether we can prevent such things in future. So which means, can you cooperate better with other authorities? I mean, I'll come to that down the show, but that's just to answer your question.
No, it is. It is an important aspect of, and also reflective of two things. One, the road to justice, India's fight against terrorism, and also, of course, US-India cooperation when it comes to intel sharing and several other matters. But Professor Singh, comment on the fact that how big a closure this would be for the victims of 26/11.
I think it's an important result of a very patient and proactive pursuit that India has had on this issue, in this case with the United States, starting from 2010, of course, then in 2019, December, the formal diplomatic note being submitted, June 2020, a formal request for arrest being submitted again, and February, when the Prime Minister of India, along with President Trump, were addressing the joint press conference, they mentioned that Tawur Rana would soon be returning to India. Now, significance of Rana coming back to India is to connect and elucidate and expose, in that sense, the links that Pakistani ISI has, Lashkar-e-Taiba has, which is the breeding ground of constant trouble for India in terms of terrorism being used as instrument of foreign policy. So how to expose that link? I think Tawur Rana would be a very interesting bundle of new information in that sense that could come out and deal with that subject. And again, as you mentioned, this is also an important signal to several fugitives and criminals. In December last year, the Ministry of Home Affairs, replying in Parliament, had mentioned that India has made 178 such requests around the world. And some of them are relatively more active, some of them are more dangerous, some of them are in developed world, and some of them are in United States. And this would also then send a signal how India's persistent and proactive approach can finally deliver.
Indeed.
And I think in that sense, it's a message not just for United States, but also all the fugitives that have left India and will be brought to justice.
Indeed. And which brings me to ask you, Tara Kartha, about the fact that I was mentioning, which was the closer cooperation between US and India when it comes to intel sharing going on from here. How optimistic are you about that, and how significant will that be?
See, this, I mean, the whole process, the way it has been, has been very, very Guy, this person and Headley, like I said, were involved in this whole thing from 2001 onwards. And we had no idea that this man was involved at all. In fact, we didn't. The Headley was what shall I say, a source for the Drug Enforcement Agency. So they clearly knew what he was up to. He was an agent for them up to a certain point when he became involved with Lashkar-e-Taiba. So there is, I don't know, it seems a little unreal to me that the US intelligence did not know about what this man was up to. But then, like we said, no intelligence agency ever has the whole picture. And I remember during that entire period, our intel sharing with the US was excellent. We had some very, very good talks with them. And there was this sense that all of us knew that something was coming up, an attack was coming up. But the trouble is, the intelligence was very fragmented. It was fragmented inside the country as well as outside. I mean, the UK had bits of information.
Yes.
The US had some. We had some.
Professor Singh, Professor Singh, weigh in on that since then, how do you see now the picture changing, and how much will that be in terms of a robust mechanism against terrorism for India?
I think other than fragmented intelligence that Dr. Tarakarta just mentioned, it's also important to understand the due process of law. And if you study the extradition treaty between India and United States signed in 1997, there are several legal loopholes that continue to be hurdles in the process like this. For example, in 2010, David Coleman was investigated by NIA in United States, interrogated, but even at that time, Rana was not made available. So there are legal hurdles that one has to patiently, cross over a period of time. And I think that shows that persistent effort on this issue by India has finally resulted in something which I would call a kind of a clincher for India, that he's been brought to India is a very significant source of information and exposing links with Pakistan in that sense. India has had a whole network India has similar extradition treaties with 48 other countries, similar extradition arrangements with additional 12 countries. So it's a very significant step forward, but it's part of a larger network of the things that India has built over decades and initiatives that India is taking in that sense in long-term dealing with a fundamental problem of terrorism, which undermines India's security, and focus on the breeding ground Pakistan. And that makes Rana's arrival here very, very critical for us.
Indeed, and I think that is where the focus will be, because the fountainhead of this terrorism is Pakistan. The reason why India-Pakistan relationship has been frozen, because Islamabad has failed to act on terrorism. And I feel after this extradition happens, maybe India will be in a better position to force Pakistan to act on terrorism. On that note, completely out of time on this discussion, I need to slip into a short break. I come back with more on the other side. Stay with us. In recent times, India's trade diplomacy has notched up several notches, in fact, simply because it needs to now forge better trade relationships. And on that, it's now holding talks with the UK, and those talks have gathered pace. In fact, they have now got a sense of urgency amongst the global trade conditions that are currently on. Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman held talks with her UK counterpart Rachel Reeves with a focus on sealing the UK-India free trade agreement. Is a possible closure of a trade pact now a real possibility, given that Trump's tariff war on the global economy is a big push towards both India and the UK signing a trade deal? In fact, let me now quickly rope in Pratik Dattani to talk more on this. He's joining me from London. He's the MD of EPG Consulting Company. Pratik, what does it look like, the fact that there are now several push factors, both for India and the UK? An FTA probably looks more likely now than ever before.
It looks so much more likely. So it's been 3 prime ministers on the UK side who have said they're going to close a trade deal very swiftly, and it's not happened. Now, finally, we have a Prime Minister in Keir Starmer who will be in his job most likely for 5 years at the very least. And that consistency on the UK side coincides with the chaos that we're seeing from Washington. So I think both the Indian Finance Minister and the Chancellor from the UK side have this big shadow hanging over them Trump's tariffs. So I think this round of negotiation this week, both on the FTA as well as the wider economic and financial dialogue, will be the most productive that we've had for months.
There's also been meetings with the Prime Minister as well from the UK side, indicating an intent to try and close some of these talks, which have been, as you said, have been in the works for a very long time. But what, according to you, are really the thorny issues that both sides need to tide over?
Yeah, so in the last few rounds of negotiation, there have been a lot of technical discussions, which is great to see that we've moved on from discussing the principles through to the very technical and operational detail. Tariffs remain an issue for the UK from the Indian side. The UK would like lower tariffs on whiskies, on car exports, as well as greater assistance from India in terms of illegal migration. India, on the other hand, would like the UK to open up its higher education market more, let more Indian students, but also help with UPI interlinkages in the UK. Another sticking point for Indian companies that have staff in the UK is that Indians working here pay national insurance, which India has argued is not a valid tax to levy because national insurance is to pay for pensions, and if Indian staff, let's say at big IT majors, are going back to India after 3 to 5 years, they will not benefit from pensions. So some of these things, I think there's a renewed focus on resolving them, maybe in this round, maybe in the next round. So I'm hoping to see some very positive announcements.
All right, Pratik, let's leave it there in terms of possibility of a free trade pact between India and the UK. It looks more likely now than ever before. Thanks much for joining me. On that note, shifting focus now, India is going to buy 26 Rafale M fighter jets, the marine variants for the Navy, in a record government-to-government deal worth 63,000 crore rupees. That's what sources have told NDTV. These will be the first major fighter jet upgrade for the country's naval forces. The purchase had been first considered in July 2023 when the Defense Ministry contacted its French counterpart. The deal will also include a comprehensive package for fleet maintenance, logistical support, personnel training and indigenous manufacturing of components under the offset obligations. All right, on that note, a quick break. I come back with more on the other side. A political firestorm has erupted as China delivers a sharp rebuke to US Vice President J.D. Vance following his controversial comments, some would say racial comments, calling the Chinese citizens peasants in a recent Fox News interview. The remarks, which surfaced recently, sent shockwaves through social media, igniting fierce backlash from Chinese citizens. The backlash was swift. Beijing's foreign ministry called these comments ignorant and disrespectful, with officials expressing disbelief over such a misguided statement from an American leader. On Chinese platforms, users mocked Vance, contrasting his description with China's thriving tech-driven economy. That's what they say, whether it's AI or infrastructure. In fact, some even went on to say that they may be peasants, but they're the ones who are actually building high-speed rail. Again, what does this mean? What does this really speak of when it comes to the US Vice President speaking like that? He's facing mounting criticism, as many urge him to look beyond the stereotypes and understand the country he's criticized. As tensions rise, the debate over global perceptions and respect takes center stage in the growing US-China relationship. Before we go any further, I want to play out some of these sound bites that top leaders in Trump administration have made. You've got to hear it before we take this forward.
Ask ourselves, what has the globalist economy gotten the United States of America? And the answer is fundamentally it's based on two principles: incurring a huge amount of debt to buy things that other countries make for us. And to make it a little bit more crystal clear, we borrow money from Chinese peasants to buy the things those Chinese peasants manufacture.
Today, the Panama Canal faces ongoing threats. The United States of America will not allow communist China or any other country to threaten the canal's operation or integrity. To this end, the United States and Panama have done more in recent weeks to strengthen our defense and security cooperation than we have in decades.
No, look, these are obviously two individuals who have very different views on trade and on tariffs. Boys will be boys, and we will let their public sparring continue.
Boys will be boys. So is that really, as I said, unless you hear this, you can't believe what you just heard, isn't it? And that's why the questions that I'm going to put forth are also going to be extremely important. First up, is Vance's offensive really meant to offend? Look at what he's really saying here. Next up, how long will Trump tolerate some of these faux pas that J.D. Vance has been making? It's not the first one. Remember, he's also been very, very acerbic in Europe as well. Next up, will this further strain relationship? Because remember, these are racial slurs that are coming in not once but several times. And what does White House's boys will be boys comment really signal? You heard that. And that's exactly why this commentary needs to be questioned, needs to be talked about. Professor Andrew Latham joins me to talk more on this. Professor Andrew, as you know, I played out that soundbite because it looks like almost like a pattern. J.D. Vance seems to be the latest, but it's like a pattern with several of Trump administration making comments that are objectionable, racial, and downright offensive.
Well, boys will be boys, and that's not a good thing. J.D. Vance is not a fool, and the things he says are not just reflexes. He's thought them through, and the way he has expressed them, I mean, really, Chinese peasants. China is so far up the value-added chain in terms of the thing. This is not China of 1,000 years ago or 100 years ago. This is China in 2025. And so to use that phrase to characterize and to encapsulate a bigger picture that he's trying to paint here, which is that China is messing with the United States, is really deeply offensive. Not just to Chinese, not just to people in the global South, but to a heck of a lot of Americans as well.
He's speaking to his audience. He's speaking to his core MAGA audience, which is why you see a certain pattern to those phrases. But do you think his electorate or the constituency to which he is speaking, and by he I mean some of the other commentary as well, are they buying some of this positioning, posturing narrative?
Well, it depends on what you mean by the posturing narrative. If it's that China is America's principal competitor and adversary and maybe even enemy, I think there are a lot of Americans who buy that. And there's some justification to that. I mean, the rise of China is a thing. It's real. But the way in which he has framed it to appeal to not just the domestic MAGA audience, but also to Donald Trump himself, I mean, that's the scary bit. He's clearly trying to curry, if I can use that phrase, curry favor with certain constituencies, both up the food chain from him, the president, and down the food chain from him, the broader MAGA movement. It's a scary symbol of the times in which we live, that anybody could say things like that publicly and not be excoriated and marginalized for it. It's almost unbelievable, except it's only too believable.
You're saying that someone may not be, or someone should be, or is not being marginalized is questionable, but the fact is it's actually being celebrated, or at least that's what it looks like, isn't it?
Yes. If I said those words on my college campus, I would be, my professional life would be over, for good reason. You don't say things like that. And it's not just in polite company. You just don't say things like that, period. Unless you want to appeal to these two constituencies, Donald Trump himself and the MAGA movement more broadly. And that's a very frightening thing for me to see, that he would deliberately, a smart guy, nobody could say that J.D. Vance is an idiot. He's a smart guy, and he's deliberately pushing certain buttons, and it's working.
Do you
and
think,
that's the piece.
The vice president is a very smart thinking individual, and there's not even a debate on that. But the fact is that, do you think this could actually have larger diplomatic ramifications? Because these are racial slurs. You are actually pushing a certain stereotype, isn't it? That And that's why, the phrase is Chinese peasants, because you're sort of pushing a certain stereotype of Chinese. And do you think it could have larger diplomatic ramifications?
Well, I'm not sure if it has larger, but it's a reflection of a bigger dynamic, which is this competition and conflict between the United States and the People's Republic of China. And it's not just those two countries. Obviously, India has been in the crosshairs for a long time, and President Trump calls it the tariff king, for example. It's a different way of thinking about the global political economy. It used to be, since 1945, but certainly since 1991, that we were talking about free trade and globalization and neoliberalism and all of those things, which have got their pluses and minuses. But now we're talking about a trade war, basically. The US versus China, the US versus India, the US versus Canada and Mexico. Can you believe that? That's madness. We're in a different geopolitical era, and J.D. Vance and President Trump and the MAGA movement are a crystallization of that moment. And it's not good.
All right, Andrew, let's leave it there. Thanks so much for joining me on India Global today. Well, viewers, bottom line really is that J.D. Vance built his political career on playing to the working class crowd. And he now finds himself embroiled in controversy after belittling an entire nation and its people. While this outburst echoes his, well, some would say reckless rhetoric, the irony is undeniable. The self-proclaimed champion of the American working class dares to insult the very people who've turned their country into an economic powerhouse. J.D. Vance's comments are not only an embarrassment to the US, some would say, but a clear sign of how he may be out of touch with the model world. This is a man who seems more interested in stoking division than understanding complexities. J.D. Vance, your words do have consequences, and there will be backlash. From racial slurs to ridicule, from Hexit to Vance to Trump himself. Will bloated egos and a loose tongue make America great again? That's the question, viewers, I'll leave you with. And on that note, I slip into a very short break. Come back with lots more on the other side. Viewers, it's April 9th. Liberation Day has arrived, and with it, news of intensifying trade war between the US and China. China has slapped tariffs of 84% on the US in response to Trump's threat that the deadline of withdrawal of tit-for-tat tariffs was today. But that's not all. Donald Trump has said that the pharma industry, which till now was exempt, will also attract massive tariff hikes. This means that Indian pharmaceutical companies like Biocon, Lupin, Sun Pharma, which have around 30% exposure to the US market, will also get impacted. But it's not just India that will be affected. The US relies on India for affordable generics, and higher tariffs will affect and lead to possibly skyrocketing drug prices. It could even lead to shortages and inflation for sure. As costs rise, American consumers could feel the sting, facing higher prices for essential medicines. And in this escalating economic standoff, the consequences of Donald Trump's tariff threat are clear. That it could be a potential crisis for people at the end of the day. Let's first listen in to what Donald Trump is saying on these tariff hikes and what our nation's wanting to do. We come back and talk more.
I'm telling you, these countries are calling us up, kissing my ass. They are dying to make a deal. Please, sir, make a deal.
Well, that's exactly what the President said, that countries are dying to make a trade deal with the US. Dr. Pralok Gupta of the IIFT joins me to talk more on this. Dr. Gupta, help us understand, and our viewers, that as things stand right now, President is saying that nations want to come and do and cut deals with the US right now. But is that really what's happening? And what do you think are the chances of a possible trade deal to ensure that these tariff hikes, the impact could be limited?
Well, this is a mixed bag, because some countries are indeed approaching US for trade deal. India is, of course, one of them. Japan is approaching them for a trade deal. But at the same time, there are a number of countries and important US partners, Canada, EU, China, they are not right now envisaging a trade deal option, rather than they are also reciprocating or retaliating with their increased tariff. So it's a mixed bag as of now, and eventually what will happen, it's pretty unsure at this point of time. And as far as India is concerned, because we are negotiating, it was discussed during our Prime Minister's visit in February that there would be a bilateral trade agreement. So from India's perspective, there is a relative certainty that we are negotiating a trade agreement with US at this point of time.
So it will definitely give a push to trade talks right now, given that it will expedite some of those negotiations. But the fact that pharmaceutical may also be impacted, how do you see that?
Certainly, till now, pharmaceutical sector and semiconductor chips were exempted from these increased tariffs. But recently, President Trump announced that there would be a tariff coming Friday on pharmaceuticals also. So in that case, major pharma industry from world, including India, would be affected. More importantly for India, because this is one of the largest exporting industrial sector. We are having around 12 billion exports to US. Most of them are generic drugs, which are low cost, low margin drugs. Our exposure is significant. Almost 1/3 of our pharma exports are to US. So this is we are going to be impacted.
Indeed.
But at the same time, I would like to say that there is some kind of silver lining, or I would say that this impact may be short-lived impact. One which you were also mentioning in your intervention, that because it will increase the cost of medicines for the US consumers. Now, because the tariff on other products like cars or other things, increasing cost is a different thing, because that is something or maybe luxurious products or which are not necessary products. But medicine is very essential commodities and necessary products. So if that cost is increasing, US
it will have social and political consequences as well.
Exactly.
But
exactly.
the other aspect I want to ask you is that, sir, that while tariff hikes and its impact is being mentioned in one way very significantly, there are some experts who believe that there could be a silver lining in the fact that it could push India to also manufacture some products. Do you see that? Have you had a chance to do any back of the envelope calculations, what that upside, if at all, could be?
Yes. So see, when there is an increased tariff on pharmaceuticals as well as other products, particularly from China, so considering that India, first of all, right now it is relatively in better situation because we have increased tariff of 26% as compared to our neighboring economies, which are having 36%, 37%, Bangladesh, 46% on Vietnam, and China now 104%. So there may be some manufacturing that will be pushed to India, and we have some incentives like PLI, etc. So there is a good chance that some of the investment will come and take advantage of this thing, and that's the bilateral trade agreement that we are negotiating with US. But apart from that, also from the purely from the international trade and international economics perspective, there is the concept of trade diversion and trade creation, which are applicable for free trade agreements, where essentially you reduce the tariffs. Here you are increasing the tariffs. So what here it is a trade depletion and trade diversion effect. So the existing trade with US, that may be depleted because of the higher prices. The consumer will not purchase so much.
You think that the trade volume may come down, yes, as talks materialize? Then let me ask you one thing. Which are you mentioned earlier that there could be some sort of an upside. Which are the sectors for India where that upside could be seen the most?
So textiles is one sector because our
labor intensive
plus Bangladesh is an important competitor. It is facing 37% tariff now. So that way we have around 11% margin with respect to the Bangladesh textile exporters. So that is a good, because textile is again a low cost product, relatively low cost product. So we have a quite a significant margin as compared to Bangladesh. Similarly, Vietnam has 46% tariff. That is also a good producer of textile. In pharma, we are competing with EU, Ireland, and Switzerland. But essentially, the drugs that they are producing and that we are producing are in the different segments. We are more into the generic drugs, and EU, European and Ireland, or
they are into patented drugs. They are more into patented drugs. All right.
Yes,
I have to leave it there, sir. Thank you so much for joining me today on India Global. At the end of the day, if there is a silver lining, if there's an upside, we wait for that. On that note, shifting focus now to the race in South Korea to lead the country is heating up as opposition leader has stepped down. Lee Jae-myung has stepped down from his party post, signaling his intention to run for presidency. The Democratic Party frontrunner, fresh off a narrow loss in 2022, is poised to challenge the ruling party embroiled in scandal and controversy. Despite his soaring popularity, Lee faces a storm of legal battles with accusations ranging from bribery to election law violations, leaving his path to the presidency well uncertain. In the ruling party, there's the Labour minister who's also in the fray, Kim Moon-soo. He's trailing Lee by double digits in polls, but with bold plans for a nuclear-armed South Korea. As Seoul prepares for a crucial 3rd June election, the battle for the presidency, well, is only just beginning. All right, amidst a growing geopolitical battle for dominance, China is upping the ante, increasing diplomatic pressure in a region where America seems to be losing footing, that is Africa. Chinese diplomats have reportedly threatened to cancel a summit and called top officials in 2 African countries to pressurize lawmakers to quit an international parliamentary group that was critical of Beijing. In the past year, lawmakers from Malawi and Gambia withdrew from the Interparliamentary Alliance on China, or IPAC, which is a group of hundreds of lawmakers from 38 countries concerned about how democracies approach Beijing. So these are pressure tactics. These are pressure tactics that are at play here. Gunjan Singh joins me to talk more on this. Gunjan, there's nothing new in this. This is a pattern that China follows, especially when it comes to African countries. But the fact that it continues unabated with no response whatsoever from Washington is not harboring for good signs ahead.
Yes, and thank you for having me on the panel. But China has consistently done that with Africa, right? And also when you look at IPAC and the recent pressure is also, you have to look in the perspective that Taiwan is an important factor here. Taiwan became a member of IPAC last year. The summit was held in Taiwan. And it's also about the UN resolution about the true China kind of a thing. Is it the PRC or the ROC? And Chinese have been pushing it to make the acknowledge that the UN resolution by which PRC was recognized as the legitimate representative of the Chinese people should be associated or linked with the One China policy. And also given the US policies right now, the tariffs and...
so you're saying Washington is preoccupied. Washington is preoccupied with some of its trade policies and does not have the time to focus on Africa.
Yes, and the US aid will leave the withdrawal or the reduce of US aid going to Africa will actually give China almost a free run, I would say, because African nations are dependent on the US aid. And given that the US is withdrawing and given the fact that Chinese trade and China is heavily investing in African nations, China will have a big sway. It will continue to arm twist, and it has been doing that consistently. But now it doesn't have any counter because if the African nations don't align or agree to what the Chinese government is saying, it's very difficult for them to look for alternative because China is their only alternative.
Gunjan, the one thing you said about the absence of US aid grants to Africa is a huge factor. But China doesn't give grants, it only gives expensive loans. How do you see that affecting? Do you see more BRI push in Africa?
Yes. Yes, Chinese have not given a lot of aid, but they do provide some aid to the African nations. And also the fact that till date, the African nations had an alternative. My argument is with the withdrawal of the US, the only alternative left to the African nations is China. The tariff, the trade will impact as well. Most of the trade tariffs that's going up vis-a-vis the African nations will make them or push them to look for alternatives. The alternative as of today, sadly, is China for them as well. Chinese have invested a lot. I think the last African-China summit, China promised about $51 billion to Africa in investments. And this might be the only alternative for them for growth and development, healthcare, in multiple avenues now the Chinese will get in. I think the
all right, Gunjan, I will have to end this here.